I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this morning's webinar on HCM configurations with two terrific presenters here today. And with that, I give you Matt and Jackie.
Thank you, Keith. So welcome, everybody. Quick blurb about RPI. We are an Infor Alliance partner and Cloud Suite specialized. We've been around since 1999, based in Baltimore, and we have consultants all over the United States. So what is a configuration? The configuration console is a tool within Infor Lawson that allows you to change the look and feel and sometimes some of the base functionality of global HR. Matt and I both love Configuration Console, and we're really excited about this presentation because it's a chance for us to both totally geek out about the things that we've created via Configuration Console.
Right. It's not necessarily going to be full depth of exactly everything Configuration Console does or all the configurations that are out there, but just kind of the cool things that we found out there. So one of the big selling points when we're talking about anything that we're doing in Configuration Console are the ability for all of these things to be contained within the system itself. Okay, it's really contained within the business classes. So even when we go through and create a new configuration for a user field, that actually is now incorporated within that business class. So if I create a user field on, say, the employee business class, if I'm using a landmark tool, all of a sudden I can start to use that or pull that field into Spreadsheet Designer or into Process Designer. I don't have to go anywhere else. If I'm using those landmark tools, it's built right into the system. I'll have that user field and we'll have it available for anything that we need to do with it. Another great thing about it is whenever we're doing these configurations, we've got the ability to query everything that's out there. So if you're ever wondering how many configurations do I have, or if you're concerned about transferring them between your test system and your production system, they're queryable and they're uploadable through Spreadsheet Designer. So it's very easy for you to pick up these configurations and move them over or save them off if you want to go through an upgrade or do any kind of testing. Also very easy for you to toggle them on and off if you ever want to just see what's happening with it, with the configuration without it. Very easy for us to do. Same with the user fields, you can always do that same kind of querying. And most importantly, what I really want to stress on that is the landmark tools are integral on it. If you're using a third-party reporting software and you want to get those user fields out at that point, really not as easy to get that. You actually do have to go through separate business classes. Use those landmark tools and they're going to be right there for you, available for your use. Now, to calm the fears of everybody in IT and HRIS concerned about, okay, well, I'm making this configuration and back in the old days, here I made a change to HR11 and I screwed something up and all of a sudden HR11 goes away after I recompiled it. You don't have to worry about this. Worst case scenario on configurations, it's going to revert back down to the base code. You're not going to blow up your entire system. And most importantly, you cannot change the base code. We have tried to change base code. Don't tell anybody, but we've tried this, and you cannot do it. So after 8 or 9 years of playing in the system now, I've never been able to do it. I don't think you've been able to as well. So you don't have to worry about completely destroying your system whenever you're doing these configuration changes.
And I just want to add one thing. The configurations are built right on the business class, as Matt said. And for that reason, when you're querying the business class, it'll just display the field name right there. And for that reason, you might want to think about naming all of your configurations with like the acronym of your organization at the end of it, so you can quickly identify what's a user field versus what's a delivered field.
Right. Or else in the same scenario, you can also, because sometimes you're not able to do like an underscore and then the name.
Yeah.
You can also preface all of your user fields with like a UF so that they're all contained down at the bottom of the business class itself.
Yeah. You'll always be able to find out what's a user field and what's not, but for that quick view, when you're just looking at it on an Excel sheet, you'll be able to know, what's user field versus what's a delivered field.
Right.
So we're going to run through a couple configurations that we've seen commonly here. The first one is Boolean field. This is probably one of the most basic configurations that you can create. It's basically a checkbox, yes or no. This is one that I've created at a client in the past. They wanted to be able to have the employee opt in or out of receiving text messages, and they only wanted this available for the telephone type of mobile, because you can't really receive text messages on your landline. You can only receive them on your mobile phone. So I had to create this Boolean checkbox conditionally on only the mobile form. Pretty simple one, but they're doing something cool with it. They're sending it to Kronos so that when someone's out and they need a replacement, they can text potential replacements with that text message feature.
So we kind of touched on it just there. We talked about that conditional displaying of that field. So that checkbox is out there only when we're using that mobile device. So we're able to set these things, or set user fields up as conditions. So the beautiful thing about this is anything that you can answer with a true or false is going to be what you're going to be able to really turn into a nice condition. These can be used for security purposes and for visibility. So not only did we just display that only when it's a mobile phone, I can also trigger a security role on that and say, all right, if that condition is met, absolutely lock it down. I might not be able to see certain employees in my organization. So I can build a condition based on a certain employee type or a certain relationship to organization and suppress certain fields even from certain users. So if I don't want the pay rate to be seen on those employees, I can tag that condition onto our security roles. Very easy to set up.
Next, we have derived fields. So similar to compute fields or condition fields, they're created using values that are already in the system. So a derived field is going to pull back for you something that's already out there. It's not going to be a changeable field. It's just going to pull that information out. So in this case, I had a client who wanted to, from the appraisal overall score, that's a number, they wanted to return the description of the range for that number. So what we had to do is loop back through a couple different business classes, through a couple different relations, and pull back in the alpha value for each possible rating level that there was. So this, again, it's pulling information that's already somewhere else in the system, but just putting it into a new spot for a user to view.
Definitely awesome how we can do that. So related to our derived fields are computed fields. Same kind of feeling on those. We're taking values that already are in the system, whether it be through a user field or through existing fields, and we're doing something to manipulate that. Not quite the same as a derived field, because derived usually has a little bit more parameterized things built onto it, whereas a compute field is really taking the raw data and doing something with it. So in this situation here, we actually have parsed out the numbers of a date field. The date field is stored, in this case, as 8 characters with year, month, day, and we just want to display it as we normally would see it with a month slash date slash year. So this is what this computed field is. The other thing that we're able to do with a computed field as well is, let's just say that we have something like that ranking, especially like on the talent acquisition side. We might have a candidate rank, and we want to compile the scores for all of this together. We can actually perform mathematical functions on those fields as well. So I can compute out and say, all right, well, this person scored 3, 5, 2, 2, 1. Let's just show that overall evaluation or overall score all computed together, so you don't have to have a recruiter sitting there doing math or anything like that. So you've got a lot of flexibility within your computed fields as well.
I've also used compute fields on the compensation module. The compensation module has a ton of delivered fields that can show you the different amounts or variables for an employee, but just in case you can't ever find one of those fields or you need to create a brand new one, you can take compute fields and build those values based on the different business classes within compensation to pull it right onto one manager awarding view. So for example, if you have merit pay and target variable compensation pay, and you want to add those numbers together for an overall total comp recap, you could put that right on the manager awarding view using a compute field.
Right, and another thing with that is, sorry.
It's okay, keep it
going
coming.
back and forth. Because these are queryable and we are able to create these computed fields and derived fields, it also means that they're real time for us. So if I was to go in and do something like change somebody's pay rate, and I have a computed field based off of that, if I query that user field now, when that query is pulled, it's pulling dynamically the new updated value. So that is something where you don't have to save it and it's stored out always as a certain value. We can have that just be a transient field within the system, and it's just always dynamically going to update itself.
Yeah.
Named type fields. So this is kind of a weird user field, but where you need it, it's really, really cool. If you don't have a business use, it's really hard to explain. Where we've normally seen this is if you had a situation like I need to show somebody else who might have a supervisory relationship to this employee, or I need to show like a third line supervisor, something like that. I could sit there and throw a user field on that is an employee. I can define it as an employee, and so when somebody clicks on that button, instead of having to type in the person's employee number, they'll actually get a drop-down list of all of your employees within the organization. You can also be a little bit more refined with it and say, all right, well, I just want to see a list of all the supervisors. So it can query that and define the user field as a manager. And at that point, I don't have to do anything else and figure out who's a manager or anything. That field is just automatically going to be pulled through and show you all the managers. In this situation that we've got right here, this is an application within talent acquisition where the candidates are presented with a value for what kind of work type would they prefer to work in. That's wonderful, but at the same time, what if they have multiple preferences? I'd like to be part-time or full-time or per diem or on-call. You know, if we have multiple preferences, there's no way for a single drop-down field to accomplish that. What we do here is we created a new user field and we defined it as the work type. So now a candidate is able to select 3 different kinds of work types that are their preferences. Again, we don't have to go through and define what all the work types are within the organization, or if we update one, have to remember to go back and update those fields. Instead, it's pulling dynamically right through the system.
And that way you already have your work type value, so you don't have to see what someone typed in and try to match that up to your available work types in the system.
Exactly, exactly. It's all about data verification at the end of the day. We don't want people to just type in fat finger things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Next up, we have relations. So again, within the system, there are a lot of business classes that are already related to each other. There are some that you really need related that aren't, and you'd be surprised at the ones that aren't related. So what you can do is create a user relation. So this is what it looks like to come in and actually create one of those. You're starting with your initial business class, and then you get to name your relation and choose the type of your relation. You can also have some conditions on here if there's any rules around it. And then down here are the relation fields that you use to actually connect the 2 business classes. So you get to choose which ones you want to use for mapping. Maybe you don't want to use all of them, or maybe you don't need all of them to map the 2 business classes. And in my example here, what I had to do was actually back to my compute fields with compensation. I actually had to bring over incentive compensation information onto a merit budget award. And down here, these are all fields that come from a different business class that wasn't originally related to this business class. So I had to create that relation to then be able to link through a couple business classes to show them here.
Action extensions. So one of the fun things that we're able to do within Configuration Console is we've got a lot of options to do things with actions themselves. And one of the best uses of them is an extension. So what we're able to do with using an extension is use that one single process flow, something like a hire process flow. We don't want to reinvent the wheel all the time. Most importantly, when we're going through an upgrade or anything, we don't want to have to go and retest 50 different versions of a hire flow. An extension is going to allow us to use the delivered, or whichever custom flow you want. I can go through and say, all right, I'm going to display the same form in 50 different ways. So in this case, we've got the manual hire form. It is using the hire action, the hire process that runs behind the scenes, gets all that information in. But what we're able to do with this is we've got all of this. We're saying that we're going to require the effective date and we're going to require the reason code. Those are going to be absolutely hard and fast rules without having to rebuild this action entirely. The next screen, if we're looking at it, this is the delivered hire form. So there's a lot of fields in there, but we don't necessarily need them. We created this manual hire form, which actually has many fewer fields. We don't need all that information for something like a volunteer coming into the organization or a student. So we are able to chop this form down to just the fields that we need. But again, All we're using is that hire action flow. So behind the scenes, it looks like a hire, it feels like a hire, it's using the hire process flow, but we just can display it in different ways depending on the needs.
And it looks like you also use Configuration Console to default in some values onto this.
Yes. I'm somewhat of a defaulting fiend. I love to default as much as possible.
Yep.
Again, just for that data verification purposes. So like on this manual hire, we can see that it's defaulted to a contractor. If you go back to the previous screen for a moment, you can see that I defaulted in, this is an employee. So we can really try to take some of that guesswork out for your staff. Just put
Streamline
things
the
in.
process.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Another thing you can do with actions is this action override feature. What I usually use it for, or use it for the most, is to change the name of an action. So this action as delivered is generate and view appraisal PDF. I've just changed it to be open appraisal PDF. A little bit more clear, especially for your end users that are managers and employees, the people that aren't in the system every single day and don't fully understand these actions and what they're doing. Make it a little bit more clear for them so that they know, what is it that I'm actually opening up here. And then just like Matt showed in his previous example, you can require the effective date, require a reason code, or a comment using action extensions as well.
If you're not using reason codes right now, one of the first things that you can do to start to streamline things, start to enforce those reason codes. Make them required on every form possible, and you start to get a lot cleaner data.
Yep.
All right, so we also have the opportunity to have a fully custom action. So this is an action that does not exist at all in the system. But instead, we're going to go through Configuration Console and we're going to create something brand new. We can have our own custom process flow that runs it. We can go through and use an existing process flow, probably not as useful in this situation. So this is usually something that is more of a brand new action, brand new process flow, and it's going to accomplish something. Something I love to tell people all the time is whatever you can do manually through the system, we can make Configuration Console and Process Designer actually do those same things. If you know that there are 5 different steps for something, if we string them all together into a single process flow, we can have a custom action kickoff to do that. So in this situation, again, on our talent acquisition side, we have, and this is somewhat being replaced by the new version of talent acquisition like we were talking about yesterday, but if we wanted to do multiple job postings all at once with using totally different forms and totally different templates, we created a custom action to actually create 2 different postings using 2 different templates. The way it normally has to happen is you have to go through manually and change the template that you're using and then save it and then create the template or the posting, go back through, save the template again, create another posting for you to use those 2 different ones. This process right here in this action is actually allowing both of those to be created in just basically 1 click. Within 30 seconds, we have 2 separate job postings. Completely look and feel different.
That sounds a lot easier.
A lot easier, absolutely. So, another nice feature that's come up lately, and I know it's really, really hard to see on the webinar right now, changes in the card view. If you're used to GHR right now, you're somewhat familiar with the card view. This is a requisition dashboard, but we can also see that all the time with an employer, with a manager and their My Staff. Infor delivers these card views, which is basically a compilation of several fields which they feel are really important for either the recruiter or the manager, all that. Unfortunately, what Infor believes and what your managers want to see are probably 2 different things. If you are a single location facility, you really don't want to see the location showing up on this card view. It doesn't really have any value for you. So recently, and I believe a very late version of 10.1, possibly
so.
just 11, I can't remember exactly which one it came in on, we're able to now go through and change these card views. So if I don't need to see location, I can remove it. If I want to replace that instead with the HR organization unit's description, I'm able to add that in there. So we've got a lot of flexibility and we can make a lot more changes with our card views. So one of those little pain points, it was one of those death by paper cut things. Nothing really, really vital, but at the same time, really annoying for people. So something that was cleared up here.
And I have a client that uses goals, but they don't use weighted goals, and the weight is included in the card view for goals. And if it's something, it's not a huge deal, but they don't even use it. So managers, employees, even the back office users might be looking at it thinking, what is this weight? I don't see it anywhere else because we removed it everywhere else, but it's here on the card view. Now with this newer version, you can actually remove things like that.
There's a general rule, I feel like, with employee and manager space that even if you're not using a certain field, try to suppress it, because the first question you're going to get is, that's great, but what's this?
Yes.
If you show them the button they can't click, there's nothing more annoying, and you're going to get more questions on that. User adoption wise, let's just configure that out.
Yeah.
Custom business classes. This is also a huge win within the past couple versions. This allows us to go through and fully create everything about a business class. So this is creating, for lack of a better term, a table on the back end. And when we have that business class created, then we can create our own lists. We can create our own forms. We can create actions, all driven off of this custom business class. Now, in the past, I always used to say, there was the need for you to do something like employee relations. And then Infor went ahead and built the whole module. So that was my best use case for that. But here is a pretty good one where working with a client right now who's working in healthcare, and their nurses belong to something called a nursing compact. So if I'm licensed, say, in the state of North Carolina, I'm actually able to also work as a nurse without getting my license in one of these other states. But there wasn't a way for us to track that in the system right now. We tried at first to just tag it onto the state, but it was a business class we weren't able to modify. So what we had to do was create this fully new custom business class to track through all of the nursing compact states for talent acquisition, and for most importantly for all of our employee credentials. We're actually able to see very, very quickly to say whether or not they've got a valid license based on this compact and based on this business field or business class. And still more of me talking.
Sorry.
So there's also a few nice little diamonds in the rough here that they've started to build in for us with some extra formatting. I was talking before about how I'm kind of a defaulting fiend. There's a lot of defaulting rules that exist on our jobs and positions, but it doesn't have everything that we need to. Or more importantly, if we build a couple business class or a couple user fields on a job or position and I need that to default down when I'm doing an action, there was really no way for us to push that over. So there was a potential for your data to be a little bit asynchronous. You don't really want that. So what Infor has done for us now is they've added in this value, or this when value changed function. So this allows us to very quickly go in and say, all right, when I go through and select person's new position, you can see that we configured this form to show things like the position description and the job code and the organization unit and the org unit description. All these things are not out of the box going to be updated. But when we added in the when value changed function on here, as soon as I enter in a position number, it's dragging in all of that information and updating all of these fields. These are actually all fields right now, and if I displayed them like fields, you would actually be able to go in and click into all of those things. So we're going to talk about in a minute how we can actually change that. So even if you click on Staff RN over there, you're not going to be able to modify it because it's all dragging through the position itself.
Another cool formatting extra is constraints. So most recently used constraint was to make a phone number actually be 3 digits dash 3 digits dash 4 digits. So if you're an employee and you're going to put your phone number into the contact information, you could include dashes, you could include parentheses, you could just have all numbers, and it really didn't force you to use one certain format. Here, if we use this constraint, to force the employee to actually, when they click out of it, it's going to put those dashes in there for them. So when the employee puts that number in, it's going to force them to have the dashes in between each sets of numbers. And then we've put a little bit of text in here just to let them know, hey, this is what it has to look like, so that there's no confusion around what they need to input there.
Right. We've also done a constraint. I think the other most prevalent one out there in the GHR world is, because we've got that work type field sitting out there, if I want to go through and do a transfer for this person or change their relationship to organization, we'll add a constraint in to say, okay, well, you can update their relationship to organization and their work type, but if they're only a 0.5 FTE, they cannot be full-time. And we can add that in, and it will pop up with that message, and it's a fully configurable message at that point for your users as well, to say, work type must be part-time when FTE is between X and Y.
And that's a big one. That really helps with keeping your data clean, because if you're walking through all these forms, maybe you miss one of these fields, and then all of a sudden actions start failing, sirens are sounding, This really prevents that from happening if you force the system to do the thinking for you.
Right. It's so much easier to close the barn door than chase after the horses. So fix your data before it's dirty. So.
Another one we have here is exit rules.
Exit rules are another huge win in the past couple years. So they sound a little bit more technical. You do actually have to manipulate these specifically through LPL, the landmark pattern language. But what we're able to do with it is say, as soon as we do a certain action, we can trigger other actions off of that. So our best example of this right here is in talent acquisition right now. If I've created a new job requisition as a manager, it sits there and it waits until somebody goes back in and then clicks on it and says, okay, I want to request approval for this right now. When your hiring managers are out there and especially learning this new system, multiple clicks are deadly because they're just not going to do it. They're not going to want to use the system because there's all these extra clicks that I have to do. So here we wrote an exit rule that says, as soon as I'm done creating that requisition, we're moving it directly to approval requested. So right away, they don't have to click extra buttons or anything like that. It's automatically going for approval as soon as somebody hits save. Really great time savings, great streamlining.
Couple extra formatting pieces. Align as label. This is a way to manipulate text that you've put onto the form, or even other fields that you've pulled onto the form. So when you're aligning it as label, you're just kind of left justifying it against the rest of your text. Sometimes fields seem to float out, in the open space, and that's a major one that just makes the form look a lot cleaner. The other one is display as text. This is the one that Matt was alluding to earlier, where he had those HR organization description, position description, I think job code in there. If he didn't put display as text, someone would be able to click into those fields and maybe change them or delete the information out of there. So display as text is especially useful when you just want someone to see and not touch.
Right.
So we're each going to talk a little bit about our favorite configurations, which happen to be like a bunch of configurations into one process. For my favorite configuration, the need was based on performance appraisal. So delivered right now in the performance appraisal system, you can have other rater feedback. However, you can't conditionally show that other rater feedback depending on who you are. So maybe you're the manager and you want to know what other raters are saying about your direct reports, but you maybe don't want the direct reports to see that other rater information. So the client had a need to unconditionally block that peer feedback from the employee. So they never wanted the employee to be able to see it, but they also wanted the managers to be able to select whether or not they wanted to see it. So the manager, maybe when they're going to meet with the employee, they want to bring a printed out version or show them on their screen under the PDF. Maybe they don't want that peer rater information on the form when they're talking with the employee, but they do want it when they're looking through the form themselves. So we had both of these things that we had to make happen in the system. And to do this, we had to do it right where the people go and actually access their appraisals. It had to happen on this toolbar because this is one of the lists at which someone can go open or view the appraisal. So because it was on this toolbar, I knew it had to be an action. I can't put a field here. This has to only be actions. So in order to create an action, I went in and I did that custom action. And I used a delivered service definition, and it worked, but it updated my user field here, this include peer feedback, after like a second. It had to run through the no approvals that I had set up for it, and it took like maybe a second and a half, and that was just too long. If someone's looking at the screen, they want to know that it updated immediately, because managers are in here and they're a little leery about new systems anyway. If they have to sit here and look at no waiting to change to yes, they probably could have called HR by that point. So I knew it couldn't be a delivered, an action request. I needed it to be an instance action. So an instance action is something that happens that you can do in the system, but it's delivered. It's not really something that you can use Configuration Console for unless you take unless you take an action request, custom action request form and create it. Just pull up whatever action request you want to use and name it what you want to name it. And then go back in and use this little configure pencil so you can get directly to the LPL and then change the action type to an instance action. So instead of an action request, it'll now be an instance action. And what this means is it doesn't need to route through IPA, it just immediately updates values in the system. So I then had to take that action and put it on the form. And then employees or managers could click that and get that yes or no value to change immediately. And I'm sorry, let me just back up here a second. When they clicked that action, it actually opens up a new window for them to manipulate that user field that I created, that include or exclude peer feedback. So I had to also change the implicit action form that was created based on my new action. So I just changed the label on that. Instead of kind of being like gobbledygook, I changed it to be a little bit more clear what we're actually doing, include peer feedback on PDF. Then I went ahead and pinned my instance action to the toolbar, just like any other action. And I had to also put in logic to force the employees and the managers to purge the appraisal PDF before they reopened it. So the reason we had to do this is because even though it was looking at my user field to include or exclude peer feedback, it looks at that user field and then generates a PDF. And if I generate a PDF and read it, and then Matt goes and generates a PDF, it's going to be based on the logic that's in the system at the moment that I generated it, since I generated it first. Mm-hmm. So in order for Matt to see what Matt needs to see, we need to have him purge that appraisal first. So to do that, I had to update all these forms and a few more to force the employee to hit the purge action first and then the open action second. So we did that by renaming purge to create appraisal, something a little bit more friendly, because who wants to purge? What does that even mean? So create appraisal and then open appraisal. So it was a couple step process here where this is the create action, but it doesn't have the forced purge yet. So this is just the create. Here's my include peer feedback action and my implicit action form with my little checkbox. When we check that, this field changes. They include peer feedback, yes or no. So then after they click the include peer feedback, they would click create and open, and the peer feedback would be included or excluded based on what they've selected. So here we have the create consolidated PDF. This was the purge that I've renamed to be create consolidated PDF. And then once it's been purged, that disappears, and now we have our open consolidated appraisal action. So here's the LPL for that. Here's the LPL for the actual PDF. Here are my two conditions. So show other rater comments when employee is not employee. That's that unconditionally never show the employee other rater comments. And then here's the condition. Show it when we're allowing to include peer feedback. So this is for the employee and this is for the manager. So here's our solution, just to kind of bring it all back together. I had to create logic to exclude the peer feedback when the employee is the employee and when my user field was false. And then I also had to create a custom instance action to choose whether or not to include or exclude that peer feedback, and then force the users to purge and then open based on whether either of these items were true.
That was pretty awesome.
It's intense.
I remember we talked about that one like right after you built it. I'm like, that is so cool.
Geeking out, really.
So for my favorite configurations, I brought in a couple of them. The first one, it looks deceivingly simple, but it actually took a lot of work behind the scenes. If we're looking at something like your in-basket as an HR administrator or a compensation approver, or anything like that, the one question that I think I've gotten at every single client in the world is, well, I'm looking at this and I can see that I've got a change pay rate sitting out there and I've got a promotion request sitting out there, but when was this supposed to be effective? You know, we're driven by payroll dates. We're driven by, you know, we can't go and retroactively promote somebody for a year ago. We need to keep those date constraints very concise. But there's no way for us to really see what the effective dates are. Most importantly, when we're processing payroll, if I need all the actions and everything to be updated for today's payroll, I need to know that this is due today and I have to take action on it. Another scenario on that would be if I'm holding on to all of my hires, my new hires, for example, maybe I don't want to process the hire action and approve it until we actually know that they came through the door. So we might hold on to them in the HR administrator's in basket. So at that point, that effective date becomes vitally important. But the only way for you to be able to see something like that is to actually open every single one of those actions, look at the request and say, oh, well, this is effective 2 weeks from now. I don't care about it. This one, oh, that is overdue. I need to do something immediately. Obviously, that is a lot of clicks for any organization that has a lot of transactions. It's going to take too much time for your administrators to do that. So this configuration is deceptively simple and deceptively hard at the same time. All we needed was to display the action effective date just in this in basket. In order to do this, we actually had to set up a relationship, a new user relation between the work units and some variables behind the scenes. We also went through and we had to display this as a user field, create that as a user field, display it on here, and then we added formatting on top of it to say, okay, if this is overdue, flag it as red. Show me the little exclamation point so I know very quickly this is something I have to take care of right now. This one down here, that's due today. I don't necessarily have to do that. That is not overdue, but this one in red, we'd better move on that immediately. So really difficult configuration behind the scenes for a very simple payoff, but it was a beautiful payoff and really was a quick win for a couple clients we've had.
And that's really the best. I mean, it's kind of unfortunate because we call each other and we tell each other how hard the configurations were, but for the client, it just needs to look simple and it needs to give them the information that they've asked for. So,
right.
You know, something as simple as this, I can feel your pain. It was probably a long haul to get that done.
I think I had you involved and Jeremy and everybody else. I think most of RPI worked on that one. So, and this is another favorite configuration of mine. Again, deceptively simple. This single form, and I can't actually show you all the fields because some of it is proprietary here, and same with the LPL behind the scenes on it. This is a single action, which looks really, really simple. All we're doing is we're updating information about the employee and their work assignment. If you're looking at it here, you can see that this is information about the employee and it lives on the employee business class. And then down here, we start to have all the information about their work assignments. 2 totally separate business classes that have to be updated on a single form. How often are you just doing a promotion and not doing anything else to the person? Are we changing them from part-time to full-time with this position? It's a really, really large action, but delivered out of the box, you have to do 2 or 3 separate actions in order to do this. Here, we've consolidated it into a single form where they only have to enter information on this one form. We've also got a lot of things going on as we're talking about our data verification and our user fields and all that. This form is packed with conditions and constraints for data validation and a whole bunch of all these other neat little tips and tricks just to make sure that we're getting good data and we're keeping it easy for our managers to do these things. We don't want them to have to follow a laundry list of things that they have to do in order to just do a promotion action. Consolidated all into one single form, and it sped things up for people significantly. And again, user adoption wise, managers didn't want to do 5 different things. They only wanted to do one, and we were able to deliver it in a single form here.
Especially if you're coming from S3 where you can do both of those things at the same time, and then all of a sudden you're in GHR where there's a lot of new awesome functionality, except now you're back to 2 actions for work assignment changes. So.
So.
And with that, I think that's all we have for you.